The next item on the agenda is an update on the CNSC response to the forest fires in the Fort McMurray region, as outlined in CMD 16M29 and 16M29A. I understand that we have our own inspector, Mr. Croy, online. I can see somebody here. Can you hear us?
Thank you, President Bender. I can hear you.
Okay, welcome. And I understand, Mr. Collin, you're going to make the presentation. Over to you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members of the Commission, I am Colin Moses, Director General of the Directorate of Nuclear Substance Regulation. We're here today to report on the CNSC's response to the recent forest fires that affected the city of Fort McMurray, as described in CMD 16M29. With me here today are Mr. Henry Rabsky, Director of the Operations Inspection Division, Mr. Luc Seguin, Director of the Emergency Management Programs Division, and in addition, as noted, we have Mr. Charles Croy, an inspector in the Operations Inspection Division, connected via video conference from the CNSC's Western Regional Office, and Mr. David Wallace, a CBRN Program Officer in EMPD. Both of these participated in the on-site response. We also have other CNSC staff who supported us from here. Before moving to our report, I would just like to note that while the requirements established by the CNSC and the actions of our licensees ensured that all the nuclear substances in the affected area were secure, the conclusions we're reporting here today are primarily due to the heroic efforts that were undertaken by first responders in fighting the fire, which resulted in the successful containment of the fires and the prevention of a more significant disaster. The role played by the CNSC staff throughout this event was focused on primarily providing support to these first responders through ensuring that they were aware of any potential risks that they could encounter during their response efforts and laying the groundwork for recovery efforts. I'll now turn the presentation over to Mr. Rabsky.
Thank you. For the record, my name is Henry Rabsky. Located in the northeastern sector of the province of Alberta, Fort McMurray is an urban service area with population reported at 73,000, situated within the regional municipality of Wood Buffalo. Fort McMurray is home to many people and companies that perform or support work related to the oil sands operations in northern Alberta. The refineries are located primarily to the north of the town, but also to the south. A map, which will be shown later in our presentation, depicts the locations of the specific operating oil refinery facilities. On April 30th, 2016, a significant forest fire was reported burning to the north of Fort McMurray. The fire grew rapidly and moved quickly towards the community. On May 3rd, 2016, the regional municipality of Wood Buffalo issued a mandatory evacuation order for the entire downtown and lower town area of Fort McMurray. The fire continued to grow and move into the community, and the evacuation order was extended to include the entire town of Fort McMurray and some of the neighboring communities. The refinery sites located to the north and south were not part of these initial evacuations. CNSC staff confirmed that the refineries were operating and monitoring the status of the fires closely. When the evacuation was declared by the municipality, leveraging our databases that detail the locations and inventories of nuclear substances and radiation devices being used by the licensees, CNSC staff identified 48 licensees that were operating in the Fort McMurray and the surrounding areas, using 92 locations for the purpose of storing and operation. In and around Fort McMurray, licensees work primarily in the industrial sector, conducting activities associated with the recovery and refining of petroleum products. These facilities require significant infrastructure to support the industry itself and the associated workforce. CNSC staff reviewed the registered inventory of licensees with operations in and around Fort McMurray and identified the following radiation devices in use: On the far left of the slide is an industrial radiography camera used to perform non-destructive testing at the industrial sites, pipelines, and metal fabrication shops. The nuclear substance used in the device is iridium-192 and is a Category 2 source according to source categorization established by the IAEA. These are considered high-risk devices based on the source's strength, their application, and their portability. The next device is a portable gauge typically used in roadwork and construction site activities. These devices generally contain americium-241 beryllium sources and cesium-137 sources. They're considered Category 4 sources and are low risk. Next is an image of a typical fixed nuclear gauge. The oil refineries employing these devices were not affected by the fires. Typically, the gauges use low-risk Category 4 sources containing americium-241 or cesium-137 sources. The last image in the slide is a portable handheld analyzer used to identify minerals and metals within fabrication facilities or recycling facilities. These are classified as Category 5 sources, typically americium-241, and are low-risk sources as well. In addition to the industrial applications and locations, the CNSC identified one nuclear medicine diagnostic clinic located in the Fort McMurray downtown core area. The clinic uses technetium-99 generators to produce radiopharmaceuticals for diagnostic procedures. These sources are considered low risk. During the response to the fires, several news stories were published that raised concerns with respect to the Beacon Hill landfill located to the south of Fort McMurray. This facility is not a CNSC licensed site. However, it contains some very low-level radioactive waste, which is below the unconditional clearance level of 1 becquerel per gram, as per the Nuclear Substances and Radiation Devices Regulation. The waste site contains low-grade uranium ore mixed with soils in an engineered cell within the landfill. It is capped with a soil cover and a thick layer of topsoil. The site is surrounded by a fence, as can be seen in the picture on this slide. The Canadian Nuclear Laboratories oversees the safe management of the site under regulatory oversight provided by the province. The material has been managed at this location since 2003. On May 5th, in accordance with its nuclear emergency response plan, and in order to ensure a coordinated response and communications, the CNSC entered a state of enhanced monitoring of the situation in Fort McMurray. The CNSC duty officer was designated as the single point of contact for first responders and emergency management organization, and staff across a variety of supporting divisions were mobilized to support the response. Initial focus was on validating the status of licensees and inventories and locations for the purposes of informing the Emergency Operations Center and its first responders. Of the 92 storage locations identified in the region, ongoing discussions and contact with licensees confirmed that 23 locations containing nuclear substances were located in the evacuated area. These locations contained 37 radiography cameras, 89 portable gauges, and 2 technetium generators, along with some low-risk sources. The next 2 slides in our presentation are to give the Commission a geographical representation of the locations of nuclear substances and radiation devices in the area of Fort McMurray and Fort McKay. The oil refineries can be seen situated to the north near Fort McKay, and to the south of Fort McMurray. The number of fixed gauges at these facilities has been determined to be in the range of 1,800 devices. While some non-essential staff were eventually evacuated as a precautionary measure, the oil refineries were not affected by the forest fires that went through the Fort McMurray area. In this slide here, you can see the storage locations in Fort McMurray area at the time of the evacuations. These are the locations that were validated through ongoing communication with licensees and CNSC staff. On May 11th, 2016, the CNSC duty officer received a request from the Alberta Provincial Emergency Operations Centre in Fort McMurray for the CNSC to provide staff to perform radiation surveys in Fort McMurray with the purposes of assuring the public that it is safe from a radiological perspective to return to homes and to businesses in the Fort McMurray area. In response to that request, the CNSC deployed 2 experts, an inspector from the Operations Inspection Division, Western Regional Office, and a program officer from the Emergency Management Programs Division to Fort McMurray. The occupational health and safety of the CNSC staff was paramount. A hazard profile was prepared with support from the CNSC's Human Resources Directorate and the Directorate of Environmental and Radiation Protection and Assessment. CNSC staff were equipped with all necessary survey and emergency equipment available from the Calgary office. I would now like to turn the presentation over to Mr. Wallace to describe the activities that were performed in Fort McMurray.
Thank you. For the record, my name is David Wallace, and I am a CBRN Program Officer with the Emergency Management Programs Division. After collecting the necessary personal protective equipment and survey and emergency equipment, Charles Croy and I arrived in Fort McMurray on May 12, 2016. Upon our arrival, we met with staff from the Provincial Emergency Operations Center to discuss the known occupational hazards and to develop an action plan to verify the status of all permanent and temporary storage locations previously identified by staff. We physically visited each of the 23 known storage locations. At each location, we took radiation measurements and inspected the exterior of each site to confirm each one was intact and secure. Any licensee vehicles encountered as we drove through town were also verified as to containing no devices. Charles and I confirmed that all locations remain safe as a result of the forest fires. In addition, the PEOC requested that we inspect the CNL long-term waste management facility located at the Beacon Hill Sanitary Landfill site in Fort McMurray. Further, at the request of the Alberta Provincial EOC, we conducted radiological surveys within residential areas that were severely impacted by the fires. Charles and I confirmed that the levels of radiation in these areas were not above background levels. We left Fort McMurray on May 13th, 2016. As previously mentioned, Charles and I verified that all known storage locations for radiation devices within Fort McMurray. This included both permanent and temporary storage locations, such as the truck shown in this picture, which was used as a temporary storage location for a portable gauge. We determined that none of the storage locations were impacted by the fires. As we drove through Fort McMurray, we stopped to verify that any licensee vehicles encountered did not contain any devices. This was done by taking radiation measurements at the exterior of the vehicles. The provincial EOC also requested that we conduct radiological surveys within the areas that were severely impacted by the forest fires to ensure that the areas were safe from a radiological perspective. This is depicted by the photo on the left. We confirmed that radiation levels in these areas were not above background levels. Furthermore, we verified the status of the CNL Long-Term Waste Management Facility located in the south end of Fort McMurray. We were able to confirm the fence around the site was intact and that the radiation readings nearby were not above background levels. Charles and I left Fort McMurray on May 13th, 2016. The CNSC ended the state of enhanced monitoring on May 16th, 2016. I will now turn the presentation back to Mr. Rabsky.
Thank you. Communications was an integral part of the CNSC response to the fires. Daily meetings were held between the Directorate of Nuclear Substance Regulation, the Emergency Management Programs Division, and the Strategic Regulatory and E-Communications Division to share new information on the status of the forest fires and to make decisions on CNSC's response. With their role as the single point of contact, the Emergency Management Program Division proactively notified the Alberta Provincial Emergency Operations Centre, the Federal Government Emergency Operations Centre, and other external stakeholders, including the US NRC, of the CNSC's decision to enter an enhanced monitoring state. They remained in regular contact with these agencies and responded to requests as required. The CNSC Strategic Communications Directorate led a communications strategy to provide first responders and the general public with information on the CNSC's response to the Fort McMurray forest fires. On May 5th, the CNSC created a web page dedicated to the Fort McMurray forest fires. The web page contained information for first responders, descriptions of the type of devices that could be found, and up-to-date information on the CNSC's response to the situation. The web page received over 2,200 page views. Similar information was posted to the CNSC social media feeds. There were 6 tweets and 1 Facebook post relating to the forest fires. CNSC Media Relations responded to questions regarding the security of radiation devices and the potential threat they pose to the public and first responders. The media were also interested in the CNSC's decision to send staff to Fort McMurray as a precautionary measure. At the same time, the CNSC General Inquiries telephone line received calls from members of the public, mostly questions pertaining to the risk posed by the fires. Currently, citizens have been allowed to return to their communities to begin the long process of cleaning up and recovering from the forest fires. CNSC staff have initiated contact with all licensees to determine their plans to reestablish operations and support of the oil refinery industry. The refineries have also been contacted so that the CNSC staff can reschedule compliance activities in the coming months and reestablish contact with responsible authorities on site. To date, there have been no issues reported with respect to the inventories that were stored in the community during the fires. The forest fire situation in Fort McMurray and the CNSC's response provided an opportunity to reflect on what went well and lessons learned. The CNSC regulations require that all licensees must be prepared to respond to emergencies regarding the nuclear substances and radioactive devices in their possession. Based on the observations by CNSC staff, the licensees in Fort McMurray did just that. It was observed that licensees initiated emergency response measures prior to the official evacuation to provide for the safe and secure storage of their radiation devices. Sometimes this involved cooperation with other licensees to borrow temporary secured storage space, and in other cases it was the relocation of radioactive devices to other safer locations. By initiating the response level at the CNSC early, roles and responsibilities were clearly identified, which streamlined information flow and assigning to actions that needed to be taken. The duty officer, as a single point of contact, was effective in dealing with outside communications to the CNSC. As far as the actions of the CNSC were concerned, one particular positive note was the CNSC's ability to mobilize staff quickly for an on-site response and with all the necessary survey and emergency equipment that they required. This came out of the Calgary Regional Office with support from Ottawa headquarters. Furthermore, CNSC staff were able to gather information on licensee inventory and locations from several licensing and compliance databases. Looking back at the response, this task could have been facilitated with more robust systems for data consolidation and stronger data query functionality. An on-demand capacity to quickly map licensee locations in particular geographical areas would have been useful in this situation. CNSC staff are now looking into developing this capability. In conclusion, CNSC staff has verified that all known locations used for the temporary or permanent storage of radiation devices were safe and secure following the fires. CNSC staff has verified that the radiation levels were not above background levels and that Fort McMurray is safe from a radiological perspective for first responders and returning citizens. This concludes our presentation this afternoon. Staff are available for any questions that you may have.
Thank you.